Hi, welcome to Parenting the Adlerian Way. I'm your host, Adlerian family counselor and parenting expert Alyson Schafer. Each week, I answer your burning parenting questions to help reduce the stress of parenting one tip at a time. We'll explore Adlerian psychology together and learn methods of child guidance for raising a happy, confident, capable, resilient child. Hi, it's Alyson, and welcome back to the podcast. We have another guest interview for you today. We're going to be speaking with Jim White, and he is an author, a coach, and the founder of the Family Enrichment Academy. He has been married for 40 years and has 6 children, as well as 13 grandchildren. His background as a family enrichment coach and life experience provides him with a unique perspective on parenthood. His book, How to Be the Parent Your Teenager Needs You to Be, is his second book on parenting. Welcome to the podcast, Jim. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So what was your first book title?
Actually, it was called Because I Said So, and that was like 20 years ago. And it's a little bit of an interesting story to that. And actually, I describe it in the current book. I got started writing 20 years ago or so, more like journaling activities. And it was a way for me to process information and, just sort of think through and reflect a little bit about things I were reading or experiences I was having. And I found myself, I had accumulated quite a bit of material, and I thought, I need to put this into a book. So I created and self-published a book. And it really, at that point, was more for our own personal use. It had a lot of family stories in it. It was a lot about experiences and stories and situations that we had experienced as a family.
But it got the writing flow going. And I'm an author. I've penned books too, but for me, it's a more excruciating process. It's nothing I would ever do voluntarily. So hats off to you. and thank you so much for sending me a preview copy of your book so that I could dig into it before our conversation today. I really found, and tell me if this is your experience in the academy and your private practice, a lot of teenagers needed, and families with teenagers, parents of teenagers needed a lot of support during this pandemic. Did you find that proportion of your practice?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. All of us experienced, it was more isolation. I think it's around connection becomes part of the issue that a lot of people experience through the, just being at home, not being able to connect in the normal way and have those normal social interactions created a lot of issue for. And then when you think about teenagers, the whole process of going to school and being in school, a lot of them were robbed of that. And actually, from a personal experience, my youngest daughter was a senior. So her second semester senior year was disrupted at the start of the pandemic, so she did not get to have graduation in a normal way. She did not get to have prom like everybody else had, so there was a sense of loss for a lot of those kids that they missed out on some of the normal activities that they were anticipating. And so there's a little bit of a grieving process to go through there as well. So absolutely, it has an impact, and it still is. I think my daughter's perspective is different than my older children who didn't go through that process during her high school years.
Yeah, I would agree that the impact of the pandemic really depended on what age and stage and also some of the foundational pieces that were happening with the family. Some people really thrived being home with their family, and some families that were under pressure really cracked under the pressure, and right. It was really difficult. And I'd say the teen years are kind of unique, and connection means something very different. It's a premise of your book. So talk about specifically the teen need for connection and how parents need to respond to that or recognize it.
Yeah. So, we all need to feel connected. And the sometimes a better way to express that is the idea of being alone. It's very trying to feel like you're isolated, alone, or left out. And your teenager is no different than anybody else from that standpoint. And in fact, they may have it may be accentuated a little bit for them because they're going through this process of, I'll call it disconnecting or trying to explore their independence a little bit more. So they want to pull away from their parents some, but at the same time, that's a scary place to be because then when they do that, they start to feel that little bit of, okay, I'm out here on an island some. And so they're in conflict about it because they want to pull away, but then they don't. And then they want to, and then they don't. And I think then for the parent, the goal is to recognize that they're going through that, and it creates an opportunity for the parent to be very intentional about building connection and keeping that connection with the teenager as a priority, because it's just so valuable for the teenager. And it's part of the parent role to be able to be the person that takes the lead on that, if you will, because the teenager doesn't really know. A lot of times they can't even express what they're going through. They're having these feelings and these emotions, but yet they don't know how to put it into words. And so that's where the parent can step into that and lean into it a little bit and work to develop that connection, to provide that sense to the teen. It becomes a safety net for the teenager at that point.
I'm sure I wouldn't be the first person to challenge you on this, but how have you not had parents say, but I want to connect with them, but I can't get them out of their bedroom. They won't come down and watch a movie with the family. They don't come to the family dinner table anymore. I can't get them to do family things. It's not for me, my lack of wanting. How do I get them to want my connection?
Yeah, it's interesting. And that does come up a lot. And parents feel that way. And I always will assert to them that they do want it deep down inside, even though they don't act like it, but it's there. And the place to start, though, is for the parent to do a little self-reflection as far as how are they approaching those engagements. And in my book, I talk about we all have these two different mindsets that reside within us. One of them is fear-based and one of them is love-based. And in any given circumstance, we're going to be responding in from one of those two different mindsets. And unfortunately, what starts to happen is we start to respond. The default response becomes more fear-based. And when you do that, it doesn't provide the opportunity to build connection and connect. And so the parent that's saying that, a lot of times they start to be, and quite honestly, they're almost afraid that they're losing that connection. And so they become fearful. And it's almost like, the person that's desperate for the new boyfriend or the new girlfriend, right? When they sense desperation, it's a turnoff. It damages the connection. And so the first place for the parent is to start to really assess where they are. And if they're coming from a love-based mindset, when they see that teenager resisting coming to the dinner table, for example, it puts you in a place where you can have some compassion for what the teen's going through, or you can have some forgiveness. And then when you engage with them, to be quite honest, the title of my book is How to Be the Parent Your Teenager Needs You to Be. That to be is critical in it. And it's, what is the underlying message that you're communicating just by your presence, and where are you coming from? Again, to use an example, you can say, I love you, but that it's the context behind that has a lot of meaning to it. And so that process for the parent of sort of doing a little self-evaluation, where are they coming from? And then from there, once you're in a good place, it's then, okay, how can I find ways to build connection? Like you said, the dinner tables may be an issue. Think of it as like steps, that's 10 steps away. I need to start one step away. How can I step into building connection in another area that's going to help improve it 2 percentage points or 3 percentage points. Then I go from there and I build another 2 or 3, and eventually you'll get to where they come to the dinner table. But sometimes there's a gap there, and you got to just continue to bridge that gap, and you have to be intentional about it and continue to work towards it. That's the role of the parent.
And really have some faith that process is going to pay off if you have the patience and the consistency, right? Baby step by baby step by baby step, and not get discouraged when you say, well, I gave them 3 invitations to do something fun and they didn't take any of them. So I give up. I'll wait for them to show me some loving back and take the initiative, right?
A great analogy I've heard, it's like planting a plant. The roots have to grow first. And when that's happening, you don't see any results above the ground, right? But there's a lot going on underneath the ground. But eventually that plant will prop up. And so you work and you build connection, and you may not see a result. And then one day, 6 months from now, your teenager walks up, gives you a hug and says, I love you. And it's like, it's completely out of the blue. How did that happen? But it's because you continue to build that foundation over time. And that's where another sort of theme I like to work with parents is the idea of being the hero within your family. The parent is the one that takes the stand for love and continues to lean into those conversations, because somebody has to, right? Somebody has to be that hero within the family. And part of our role at the Family Enrichment Academy is to provide a community of support for those heroes out in their family, because sometimes they may not feel that supported within their family, for example. And so that's part of what you're doing with the work that you do, and what we try to do is, continue to provide encouragement and empowerment and support for the people to step into that and continue to engage and move along their journey.
In Adlerian parlance, we say that a discouraged parent can't be an encouraging parent to their child, that we ourselves have to have our bucket full before we can, then pass that encouragement along to our kids. And it's draining to be a parent. And we do have to either self-encourage or find those support systems outside the family, that community for those individual heroes that are doing their hero's journey behind the closed walls of their houses. Right.
Exactly. It's critical. And you do, as a parent, it's, it helps to have that support, obviously. And that's where, the first, I think of within my book, I talk about 3 different fundamentals. And that first fundamental is around the parent managing themselves and their mindset. And you call it being discouraged. I mean, if you think about discouraged, it comes from that fearful mindset. I talked about those 2 different, and the fear is that I can't fix it. There's no hope for the future. And that then becomes fearful because you feel like it's a lost cause, for example. Whereas if you can shift to a love-based mindset, you start to see hope out there. And then that provides the energy to continue to move forward.
So you also are aware and address this in your book that shifting mindset, we can agree, okay, fearful's not going to take me the direction I want. It would be better to have a loving mindset, but getting from A to B, getting from fear to love, that's hard for a lot of people. What are the steps and the scaffolding that you give to support people around shifting their mindset, especially when they're reactive in the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a challenge. And because of that, you have to be very intentional. So kind of the first step is for this parent to sort of open up to the possibility of making a shift. And I like to, encourage parents to think in terms of a growth mindset. That's kind of the first thing. You have to be able to adopt a growth mindset, which means I'm going to make an effort to get better. No different than if you decided to take on a health and wellness program, right? You got to sort of say, okay, I'm going to step into this knowing I've got to make some effort here. And so that's the first step. And then from there, I like to, sort of the next thing is to start to create some awareness. And again, there needs to be some intentionality here. It's starting to be aware. And I like for parents to look and be aware of the emotions they're experiencing, because those are signals as to where they're coming from. If they start to experience anger or frustration or disappointment, those kinds of emotions, that's typically a sign that they're fear-based at that moment. And so it's just a signal, it's something that, and if they notice, oh, I must be coming from a fearful, and they may not know why, but I must be fear-based. And so the kind of the process I like to walk them through is, okay, now you have that awareness, try to create a pause, stop for a minute and create a pause. And then it's a question of, okay, how else can I look at this situation? You sort of ask yourself that question, and actually I have 3 questions. They're sort of simple, but it's amazing. It can have some impact. The 3 questions are, what do I need to forgive in this situation? So you kind of ask yourself that. If you create that pause, ask, who do I need to forgive? Then to create a little transition, you say, well, what am I grateful for in this scenario? Or what can I be grateful for? So you're trying to move from, being fearful to more of a grateful or compassionate mindset, or what can I be compassionate about? And then the final question is, how can I make a difference here? And that sort of is the action-oriented piece. Once you've shifted that mindset, now what do I see as a potential action I can take to move this forward? And how can I make a difference? So those are an example of 3 questions that somebody can use to help create that shift in mindset, kind of in the moment.
And so with intentionality, we do the compassion piece. We walk through the 3 steps. I can still hear parents saying, if I just lovingly, compassionately understand my child's lack of motivation around homework, what's my action piece to make them do their darn homework because they're going to fail. Oh, wait, I'm going back to fear. I fear they're going to fail. But if I just love them, they're not going to do it. And then it's going to be on me that I failed my child because I feel this sense of responsibility in my role to make sure my child gets an education, and they're floundering. I can't just love them into an A+. How do what are my action steps?
Right. So it's a very common, and I think what happens, and I like to describe it as, when the children are young, as parents, we tend to control what goes on, right? We decide when they go to a friend's house, we control everything. But as they move into those teenage years, there needs to be this natural transition away from the parent controlling everything. And in effect, you start to turn over that responsibility to the teen, which, if you think about long term, that's the goal, right? When they're 25 years old, they need to be able to be responsible for themselves. And a lot of times what parents struggle with is, if I let go of controlling it, and like you say, I just love them, they don't know what the alternative is. What do I do as an alternative? And that's where I like to introduce the mindset and the idea of empowerment. Your goal now is to support and empower them to take responsibility for whatever you mentioned, schoolwork, for example. So eventually that teen has to take ownership in their grades. And it's up to them, and they have to start to see the results of that, if they try or if they don't try. And the hard part for parent is letting go of that a little bit, because we want to control it, right? And like I say, we become fearful that they're going to fail at it. Interesting thought, though, is if you go in and control and try to manage that for them, the underlying message that you're communicating to that teenager is they aren't good enough to do it on their own, right? And so we don't mean to communicate that to them, but that's what they hear on the other end is, well, I must not be able to. That's why mom and dad's got to help me do all this stuff. And so if you can start to break that cycle, if you will, and turn that responsibility over to them, and then develop skills to empower and influence them. And it's a different skill set, if you will. And it's primarily around questions. Let's say you have, in your example, a teenager has a bad grade on a test. Rather than going in and redesigning their study plan and you taking control of it, you have to start asking them, okay, that's a bummer for you, right? It's their problem, not yours. And you say, how could you study differently next time? Or what could you do different next time? Or where could you get additional resources? You just sort of turn the problem back to them. And they may not know the questions to ask, so you ask them for them, but let them process and come up with an answer. That's empowerment approach. That's letting them process things. But again, the hard part is the parent has to be okay with the fact they may fail a few times in the process. And that's a struggle, and can be a struggle.
That's one of the big fear factor. Right. And I think that's where, your expertise on reframing that and realizing that this is where growth happens, learning from past experience, even if the past experience is mistaking your way to success, right? I can't think of a better way to figure out you need to study more than to not study enough and get one bad grade.
Right. And think about this. This is, again, how I like to reframe it for parents is, you go in and rescue the teen and do, kind of take over and control it. One, it damages the relationship, first of all. But on top of that, you're also not, the reframing of that is, if you let them go through that and experience them and support them in solving that problem, you're teaching them resourcefulness, which is huge, right? You want them to be resourceful, to feel like they have the ability to solve their own problems and they can get through something. And then the other big one is resiliency, right? Can they go through a struggle and know that they can come out the other end and be okay? And the only way to develop resourcefulness and resiliency is to go through some difficult times. And it's better that they do that inside the loving environment of your home than when they're 25 years old or 30 years old and they're out on their own. I mean, they need to already hopefully have those skills before they get there. And so if you look at it from that perspective, it's like, oh, this is a great, we've had times where our kids have had issues and failed a little bit. And it's like, oh, wait, this is a great opportunity for them to develop some character going forward. But you have to then approach it that way.
How do we get parents to realize that as their child is building their resiliency and maybe not performing optimally with some of their responsibilities, that this is not a reflection on them. Like, I find that parents can say, oh, I know I need to let them fail, or I know I shouldn't step in and rescue, but they're so concerned with their own prestige that what will the teacher think of me? What will the people at the hockey practice think if my kid doesn't come with all his equipment? So I got to check his bag. They're really concerned with their own prestige. How do we get parents themselves to get okay with raising imperfect children, and that they'll survive that themselves?
Right. It's a great point. And it's very, very common. So the first thing I would say to parents is give yourself some grace if you relate to that whole possibility there. And I like to also encourage parents to think of parenting as a personal growth program for themselves. And so that's the first piece of it I would throw out is, hey, this is an opportunity for you to grow and develop as a person, not just you developing your child, but you as a person. And one of the areas of growth is in your own ability to, again, choose between a fearful and a love-based mindset. And if you think about that prestige, they're fearful that they're not going to look good. And it goes back to not being good enough and not feeling like they belong, and all of that kind of internal mindset issues. And this is an opportunity to step into that and see if you can start to create some shift there. And I always throw out that if you think that's an awesome opportunity, because if, as a parent, and I know for myself as a person, as I have gone through, and we've all gone through it, as you go through that, your life just works better. Not just your families and you being a parent, but everything in your life works better if you start to be more love-centered. And part of that is having that love for yourself, if you will, and having that being able to be comfortable with yourself and knowing that you can make a difference and that you don't have to be perfect, as you described. And it's all mindset when you think about it. It's not so much about doing something different. It's about your mindset and your beliefs and your values and how you're processing information. And so there's an opportunity for a parent to step into that if they're open. But again, the first step, they got to have a growth mindset. And if they're willing to say, oh, this is an opportunity for me to grow and learn, and to put some effort towards that growth.
Often when a family will come in for family counseling and the presenting issue will be a child that's got some unruly behavior, and I think, thank goodness for this kid, because he managed to get enough symptomatology that was unbearable to bring people into counseling, so that now we're going to learn how to solve problems, how to be better communicators. Right. Parents are going to figure out their wiring and what triggers that. They're going to learn all these things that if this kid, was behaving better, you probably suboptimally would have skimmed along parenting. But now you're going to learn all these amazing things that are going to improve the quality of your life in so many of your ways, not just within your family, but out in the bigger world. It's a gift that these kids bring. But you have a concept too about understanding these kids that are disturbing or creating worries, and for parents, whether that's starting to dabble with drugs or hanging around with a bad friend group, or, mental health issues. Something comes up where parents are seeing bad choices, bad behavior. That's how they're reaching out to you in the academy, I assume. Yeah.
It's typically, they're feeling a little lost. They're stressed and lost about what's going on. And it can be actually social media. I'm sure you're dealing a lot with social media right now, becomes a big question for, how do I deal with that? And again, a lot of times the initial contact, it's about, I don't know what to do or how to control this situation. And it goes back to that control. And so the first shift is, okay, it's not so much about controlling what's going on. It's about, how do we empower your teenager to make better choices? How do we empower them to be more responsible? Because again, the ultimate goal is, if you control the environment and the social media, for example, in your home, but when they're 25 and they're living on their own, they're addicted to it, you haven't helped them at that point, right? They have to be able to start to manage and make better choices. Same things with drugs and alcohol. We see that where, teens, they get involved. It may be able to be controlled somewhat to keep it from being a big problem when they're at home, but they don't really learn how to be responsible around it. And then when they get into their 20s, it does become an issue that's a real problem for them. And so the goal is to put them in a position to be responsible and to act responsibly. And that's where empowerment comes in and building connection comes in, because you can't influence them without a strong connection. I think that's another important point to make, is that connection has to be there first.
Yeah. Now, these aren't bad kids.
Yeah. And it's not that they're bad kids. And actually, one of my little rules of thumb I like to share with parents is that any unwanted or bad behavior is first a call to connect or a call for love. And they're acting that way because it all starts with them feeling isolated or alone or left out. And what happens is, that creates this negative energy or emotion for the child. And sometimes it's just got to get out. And it comes out typically in bad behavior. And they're not always connected. And I'm sure you've seen, a child struggling and feeling stressed out around a grade on a math test, for example, and the end result is they pick a fight with their younger sibling. Right. And it's negative energy that's got to get out. And so it gets out somehow. And my point is, that's a symptom of this underlying need to reconnect and to feel safe and to, kind of, again, just reconnect and feel some love. And then once that's there, then you can move on to resolving issues or influence or empowerment. But you got to have that connection first.
Yeah. And again, going back to sort of jargony Adlerian talk, we say kids who feel good, do good. Kids who feel bad, do bad. And so it doesn't help for us. If you have a kid who's doing bad, it doesn't help us to punish them and make them feel worse. We're just going to get more bad behavior. We're moving in the wrong direction. But a lot of times when we respond with love, parents will say, you're letting him off the hook. How can you? That's a very different model of how change happens. Do you get parents saying, "But shouldn't there be a consequence? You're letting him off the hook? You're going too easy on him."
Well, and that's an interesting dynamic because I always say, well, you're not letting him off the hook. So let's say a teenager breaks curfew, right? And the rule that's understood that is, if you break curfew, you don't get to use the car for the next week, whatever it is within the family, right? Well, when they break curfew, the question is, you can still enforce that rule, but you can do it with a compassionate heart. I understand that that's upsetting for you. I understand it's frustrating, and you can have some compassion as opposed to saying, you broke the rule, you're a bad kid. I told you, you should have never done that. You come at it more aggressively, if you will. And so just because you're approaching it from having compassion, that's love-based. They're going through a difficult issue. You still can have some love in that environment. And if you think about it, if you approach it that way, it strengthens connection because the teen at least feels like they're heard, right? One of the things all of us experience is, we want to feel heard. And if the teen's experiencing frustration and you tell them, well, you shouldn't be frustrated, you knew you were going to have this issue. You're telling them their feelings aren't valid at that point, as opposed to approaching it with compassion and validating their feelings. Doesn't mean you're going to, back off on the consequence, but you still can build connection in that scenario by approaching it with love. And so it's a matter of, being able to still hold firm, if you will, at the same time, do it from a love-based perspective. I think that makes sense to me.
Absolutely. And I think the curfew is a great example too, to illustrate this, the power of influence and the power of the relationship, because going back to when my kids were in their teen years, if I said, I really, the rationale behind this curfew is that I really can't fall into a deep sleep until I know that people are home and I'm getting exhausted. That I need to get my sleep. Now, when your kids care about you, and it's like, we want mom to be able to get her sleep. Like, this is impacting her. Decisions that I'm making are impact my mom, and I love her and I want her to get a good night's sleep. And there's a caring response from a caring child because we're in a good relationship. And so there's true empathy and compassion to be supportive to me. So that's the power of influence. If the relationship isn't there, they can say, who cares if you get a good night's sleep? You're ruining my fun over here and making me do homework there. So back at you. I've got no goodwill for you. You got no goodwill for me. So it's everything in the teen years.
Right. And that's where that connection is so critical. That's the foundation of it. And in simple terms, they have to feel like you're on their side in some way and then they will be on your side as well. And you communicate that by, listening to them and letting them have their opinions and one of my strategies for building connection is curiosity and asking curiosity based questions. And so you go to the teen and you say, what's your favorite kind of music, for example, and they start talking about it. The key for the parent is, they're sharing that. You can't pass judgment on it and start telling them they're wrong, right? It's their opinion. Let them have it. And, I throw out an alternate responses. Well, that's an interesting perspective. I never thought of it that way. I mean, that's how you can respond and let them have their opinion and their thoughts. And that helps them to feel heard. It helps them to feel like there's some trust in the relationship, which, puts you in a position that build that connection. So there's a lot of value in building that first. So then when you deal with one of these issues, curfew or whatever it might be, you've got that foundation to work from.
So important what you just said there, as we're talking about moving from the fear to the love mindset, and then in that love mindset, not making it conditional or judgmental, right?
Right.
To be able to connect in a way that is pure curiosity, not, why are you wasting all that time on TikTok? That's just brain rot. Why don't you do that's right. As opposed to like,
it's very judgmental.
That right. is, yeah, right. Who do you like to follow on TikTok? What fascinates you about that influencer, whatever? Right. I mean, that's like, you learn so much more about this person in front of you. And they are their own person, right? Getting to know this person as they individuate and become their authentic self. It should be something that we stand in wonder of.
Right, exactly. And I tell you, they can be so thoughtful and insightful if you just let them talk a little bit, without dampening it down. And the more you allow them to express themselves, the more they will do that. And again, that deepens the connection, which in the end gives you the opportunity to influence and empower them. And they're connected, but the connection comes first. Like as you said, you can't influence or empower if you don't have a good, solid connection. So that's the first place to start is there.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, if you touch a hot stove and you get burnt, are you going to touch it a second and third time? If every time your child comes to you and reveals a little bit about themselves, they get judged or criticized, they're going to shut down. So this is the trying to rebuild that trust of being a safe person to open up to so that you can get answers to these curiosity questions. But you have 9. I really love that you don't just say, go get connected with your kid. You really are in the book. You really spell out 9 very different ways. And you did talk about the curious one. Can you say a little bit more, give some more ideas to parents who might be feeling a little lost? They have the desire, but they're not finding their way.
Yeah. One I would throw out, and this requires a little self-reflection on the parent, is the idea of being present. And the premise is when your teen comes to you and they're maybe ready to talk, sometimes as parents, we aren't present in the, what I mean by that is you're looking at your phone or you're working on something, you're doing an email or you're watching something on Netflix yourself. I mean, if they are ready to talk, you need to drop everything and turn and focus your attention and be present with them. And because what that communicates is what they're saying is important, which helps to deepen that connection. So the whole idea of being present and available is a great way to connect, again, because it communicates that sense of value to them. And you have to realize it's not going to be at the most opportune time. I think actually in the book or on this topic, I talk about my younger daughter coming home at 11 o'clock at night, and I just happened to be in the kitchen. Normally I'd be in bed. And, she makes a comment. She said she worked as a waitress, and she made a comment that was like, people can be so difficult. And, I could have just said, yeah, I know what you mean, good night, and gone back to bed at that point. But as an alternative, you recognize, this may be an opportunity to talk a little bit. And so you ask a curiosity question. What do you mean by people being so difficult? And then you turn and sit down and listen and let her talk for a minute. And again, it was late at night. I would have preferred maybe to be in bed at that point, but she was ready to talk. And as I recognize it as an opportunity to be there and listen. And then it goes back to what we were just talking about. When she starts to explain everything that happened, it's not my job to fix this. She just needs to talk, right? So I just listen and acknowledge her feelings and validate what she's going through without trying to fix everything in the process. Because again, it's not my job to control it. I'm just trying to provide a safe place for her to let those negative emotions dissipate a little bit. So, so being present, I think, is another great way to connect as well.
That's so beautiful. And I just, I'll share a story, not with my kids, but with my, I'm divorced now, but my then husband, when I would do speaking engagements or teach my night classes, my parenting classes, and I would come home, same thing. That's what made me think about it, the 11 o'clock at night. So I'd come home late at the end of one of these, and he would inevitably, be now in the middle of a television show or a movie or something. And every single time he would turn off the television and turn and look at me and say, "How did it go tonight?" And it was so, to me, to say that I'm more important than, the cliffhanger of this, sci-fi movie that you're watching, or, that my arrival home was the most important thing to you, and you genuinely checking in on how my evening was so validating of my importance and my worth in that relationship, and so that showing up, that being present, not just the keeping the TV and shouting, over your shoulder, "How'd it go tonight?" Not really wanting to hear the answer.
It can be so powerful, and it's a great way to build connection. And we've mentioned another one of them, and I've mentioned it a few times. It's the idea of being compassionate. That's being able to listen to them and have some compassion for what they're going through. And again, you can see the connection between these in the title of the book. It's about how to be the parent your teenager needs you to be. It's having that presence with you, because again, compassion communicates that there's value in what they're going through, and that you understand or can acknowledge what they're experiencing and going through. So that's another example of a way to build connection. I like the idea of shared experiences. I'll just share one more, which is the idea of a shared experience. And that's a way of having quality time. We think about time with the child, and sometimes you can have that quality time, in the ride home on the car after you pick them up from school. But another great thing to do is to try to create some kind of a unique shared experience. And actually, there's one story that I don't know, I just find this really cool. I might share. There's a local church that does a mother-daughter mud run every summer. And the premise is, and it's for teenage daughters, this church has quite a nice grounds, and they basically hose down and create a mud course. It's a half mile long or whatever. And they have the mom and daughter make their way through this obstacle course. And when they get to the end of it, obviously they're both covered in mud, and they're just a mess. Well, what the daughter doesn't know is that the mother has been instructed to write a letter ahead of time. And their prompt is, "You're not very beautiful right now," meaning, because they read this letter to them after they're in the mud run. "You're not very beautiful right now, but here are all the reasons why I think you're beautiful." And then the mom lists out a lot of internal characteristics, right? And the point is, that's an experience, right? That's a shared experience. And the pastor that I talked to about this says that he's heard those daughters will take those letters to college with them, and they pull them out when they're, feeling homesick and it's late at night. They go back to those, and it becomes part of that connection between the mother and the daughter at that point. So that's an example of a shared experience. Other things, I love educational things, take a cooking class with your son, something like that. Again, where you can do something together. So those are great ways to build connection. And it's about quality time at that point.
I love all those examples. And to your point about the putting it in writing, the note at the end, not just doing the mud experience together, but that writing, if you have a kid whose ear you feel you can't get, they are so curious, they will want to read whatever you write. So if you leave it as a love note under their pillow, or a shared journal back and forth, they may not express it. They may not say thank you, but it's sinking in. It does matter. It does count. Those are beautiful examples.
Absolutely. Yep.
Is there anything else you want to make sure that more? I mean, there's so much information in the book, and I really want to encourage parents to pick it up. And I will put the link to the book in our show notes, obviously. But is there anything before we wrap up this conversation? Any holes that you want to fill, or make sure that our messages that you want to make sure that our parents hear today?
Well, I would say that probably the most important or the biggest opportunity is around adopting that growth mindset and realizing that parenting is a journey, and you're going to be confronted with new circumstances and obstacles and issues every day, which is why you have to have that growth mindset. That's probably the most critical thing in getting through the teenage years. I mean, I like to, it's a journey. If you think about it, with your first child, when they're 10 years old, you've never had a 10-year-old before, right? So every day is a new day in experience with a 10-year-old. Well, when they turn 15, it's a new day with a 15-year-old, and you're going to have new things that happen and differences. And then if for some reason the family has to move, oh, here's a new circumstance that you never dealt with before. So there's always going to be these new issues and circumstances out there. And the first step in getting through those is having that growth mindset and being open to, okay, how can I grow and learn from this situation? How can my teenager grow and learn from this situation? But you can't get anywhere if you aren't open to the possibility of growth, which is where hope comes from. When you have hope for the future comes when you realize the future can be different than it is today. And so if a parent is struggling and there's relationship with the teen is disruptive and it's not good, the hope for the future is, okay, we can grow. Each of us can grow and learn and become better, which is going to make the whole situation better. But it all starts with growth.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so very much. Can I toss this back to you to say, where can people find you? Again, I'll put it in print, but let me just throw it to you. And any upcoming courses, or tell us about the Academy. How can people follow you and get more?
Sure. So it's FamilyEnrichmentAcademy.com. So again, FamilyEnrichmentAcademy.com. You can go there. That's the website. And actually, one thing I might mention, right on the homepage, I've got a free resource for all of the listeners out there. One of the most common, and we've talked about a little bit about it, one of the most common questions is, I can't get my teenager to open up or talk to me. And one of the solutions is you have to ask better questions. And so this free resource I have 10 questions you should never ask your teenager. Think of them as like conversation killers, and then 10 great questions, the conversation starters. And again, it's a free resource. It's a great way to connect to our community. And it's right there on the homepage of the website. You can request the download for that. So anyway, but the website, again, is the best place to connect and learn about the coaching programs. I publish content on a regular basis, much like you. So there's a blog there and a podcast, that sort of thing as well. But it's all available there at the website.
Wonderful. Great. Well, we'll put that in the show note as well. And thank you so, so much. A wonderful conversation. And thanks for all you're doing for families to help get through these years, and so that people know you're not alone. There's hope and help out there.
My pleasure. And as I say, it's always an honor to be able to serve and support people, as they move along this parenting journey. So I appreciate the opportunity to engage and hopefully maybe throw out a little insight for somebody in your audience.
Thank you. I'm sure you have.
As you know, it takes a village to make a podcast, so thanks to my team, including Max Cotter, my editor and technician, as well as the crew at H2O Digital. This podcast was recorded in Toronto, Canada. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit.